It's Johnny Two-Face here, back with another reaction video. This time I'm reacting to Second Civil War, or Fitna, in the Caliphate, early Muslim expansion documentary by Kings and Generals. Now, if you haven't seen my reactions to the other episodes in this this documentary series by Kings and Generals, I suggest you check them out before checking this one out. And the usual disclaimer when I react to anything historical, if I don't show so much what is considered a proper reaction, is probably obvious. I don't know much about the subject at hand, and if I do know anything, I'll most likely pause the video to give my input, or ask any curious questions, which hopefully will be answered in the comments section. So, with that being said, the link to the original video will be in the description down below. Please go and subscribe to Kings and Generals. To me, they're another amazing history channel here on YouTube. Sorry, itchy nose. And oh, one more thing. Sorry. Sorry, just turned my fan on because it's starting to get quite warm now. And I'm not usually one who deals with heat very well. For me, it's just energy draining. But I'm sure there's plenty of people who feel like that. I just feel it more than most. But anyway, irrelevant side note. So let's. I'll not waste much more of your time rambling. Let's just get this up on screen. Captions on, and see what happens in this episode. Ooh, turn that down a little bit. Sorry, just hand cream.
In our previous video, growing anti-Umayyad sentiment and the killing of Caliph Ali's son, Al-Hussein, saw Abdullah ibn al-Zubayr accepted as caliph across the vast majority of the caliphate. So heralded was al-Zubayr's ascension that coins were being minted in his name even on the frontiers of Persia, while the Umayyads under Marwan were restricted to control over Syria alone. But while this new Zubayrid Caliphate's victory may have seemed all but complete, the colours on a map alone cannot adequately represent the complicated political situation of the divided caliphate.
Well, especially given by sources
at the time. Shout out for some great coverage of a historical struggle that came to the region a little later, the Crusades.
Oh, yeah.
You can get it at Magellan TV with their documentary In the Name of Honor and Glory.
Feel free to check them out if you're interested.
Via our link in the description. In many cases throughout the empire, local notables had nominally sworn loyalty to Ibn al-Zubayr while remaining functionally neutral, using the breakdown of authority to avoid Umayyad taxation. In others, Zubayrid authority was reliant on unsteady alliances with Kharijites and Shiites, and though these groups might have made common cause with Ibn al-Zubayr at first in order to topple the Umayyads, an alliance with the Kharijites would never be a lasting one unless he adopted their beliefs, alienating his other supporters in the process, and the Shia refused to name him caliph, seeking for a descendant of the murdered Caliph Ali to take his place on the throne. Thus, while Marwan controlled a secure Syrian power base and the caliphate's treasury, Ibn al-Zubayr struggled to create a united front amongst his supporters, leaving the Umayyads stronger and the Zubayrids weaker than their lopsided territorial control would suggest. Indeed, shortly after the Umayyad victory in the Battle of Majrahit, Marwan was able to take Egypt largely unopposed, with his clansman Amr ibn Sa'id entering Fustat and rallying its population back to the Umayyad cause, while Marwan stood in standoff with Egypt's Zubayrid governor Abd al-Rahman ibn Jadam outside the city, a major step towards reunifying the caliphate and a sign of Ibn al-Zubayr's hollow authority. Meanwhile, other outbreaks of civil strife were occurring across the caliphate, most prominently in the Khorasan region, with Abd Allah ibn Qasim having never been appointed to governor by any caliph, instead forcing out Umayyad governor Salm ibn Ziyad thanks to anti-Umayyad sentiments among the army. The
Wow.
power vacuum allowed numerous local communities and factions within the army to drive out officials and seize control across Khorasan. However, Ibn Qasim's effectiveness and brutality in suppressing both rebels and opportunistic Hephthalite raiders, reportedly ordering his forces to execute prisoners until the sun set after one victory, quickly ended any opposition, allowing him to rule with little regard for either faction during the following years of civil war. And in Kufa, a militant Shiite movement known as the Al-Tawabin, or Penitents, was gathering steam. While the death of al-Hussein had caused shock and outrage across the entire Muslim community, the impact had been greatest among the Shia community of Kufa, whose support Hussein had been travelling to enlist, with many seeking either vengeance or martyrdom to compensate for failing to aid him. With the outbreak of the second fitna, propagandists were sent to garrison towns across Kufa, calling for vengeance and the turnover of power to the family of the Prophet. The movement began to split, however, with the arrival of Mukhtar al-Thaqafi on May 7th, 684. Mukhtar claimed to be a follower of Muhammad ibn al-Hanafiyyah, a son of Caliph Ali through a different wife than the Prophet's daughter Fatima. Al-Mukhtar's claimed that Ibn al-Hanafiyyah was the promised Mahdi, or the guided one, and
The Muslims believe that the Mahdi would appear near the end of time shortly before the descent of the Prophet Isa to protect humankind from chaos and corruption by the false Messiah. Okay.
the prospect of serving an heir to Ali served to sway a portion of the penitents away from their leader, Suleiman ibn Surad, and create a bitter divide. When the Zubayrid governor, Abdallah ibn Yazid, arrived on May 15th, it was all he could do to prevent violence breaking out between the two factions or against their erstwhile Zubayrid allies. Further weakening Ibn al-Zubayr, his Kharijite allies in Mecca deserted him during this same period. Tiring of al-Zubayr's vague claims of ideological support, they relocated to Basra and the Al-Yamama region to raise a rebellion of their own under the leadership of Abu Talut. They would remain a major thorn in the side of the Zubayrids, even conquering much of the Arabian Peninsula in the coming years. Of all these groups, the first to engage in a major campaign would be Suleiman ibn Surad's penitents, who began their long-awaited invasion of Syria on November 15th, 684. However, despite the lingering grief over Hussein's death and years of propaganda work, Suleiman was greatly disappointed by the turnout when his call to arms finally came, with only 5,000 out of 16,000 whose support had been promised materializing, and many of these deserting in the coming months.
Jeez.
Nonetheless, despite Abdallah ibn Yazid's attempts to convince them to remain in Kufa in unity with the Zubayrids, he wasted no time in departing, leaving Kufa on the 17th, first to Hussein's tomb at Kabbalah for a day and night of mourning, and then on to Al-Qarqasiyah. Here they were provided supplies and information by the sympathetic Qaysi chieftain Zufar ibn al-Harith, one of the Zubayrid commanders during the disaster at Majrahid. The Umayyad army, returning from the subjugation of Egypt, had recently left Raqqa and was marching towards the town of Ain al-Wada on their way to invade Iraq. Informed of their whereabouts by Zufar, and enjoying superior mobility with his mounted army, Suleiman made haste to reach the site before his foes, arriving 5 days before the Umayyads and camping to the west of the city in order to cut them off from food and water. Having reinforced in Egypt and numbering close to 20,000, the Umayyad army held an advantage in numbers, but was divided against itself. While Ubaydallah ibn Ziyad was in overall command of the army, he was not present during its march through what was thought to be friendly territory, leaving two of his commanders, Al-Hussein ibn Numair and Ibn Di al-Kala, to squabble over leadership, travelling and camping separately as they marched unknowingly towards the
Yeah, that usually, if you see me react to any other historical videos, it's just shown throughout history. Oh god, I wish I could describe this better. Where, like, that's the fall of empires, when too many commanders fight amongst themselves instead of providing a united front. But yeah, but you can see like one of the three armies. Hang on. Yeah. Hang on.
The Umayyad army held an advantage in numbers, but was divided against itself. While Ubaydallah ibn Ziyad was in overall command of the army, he was not present during its march through what was thought to be friendly.
Yeah, it's like Ziyad's like underestimating the. Whoops, too far. Like Ziyad is underestimating the danger
as they marched unknowingly towards the penitents' ambush. When they arrived at the beginning of January 685, it was Ibn al-Khalah's smaller contingent that first saw battle, with the penitents being led to his camp by a local Bedouin and launching a surprise attack. Though outnumbered, surprise and confusion allowed Suleiman's charging horsemen to put al-Khalah's forces to rout, with many being run down and slain, and their camp abandoned to be looted. This initial engagement would do little to even the odds, however, and Ibn Numayr was sent with a larger force of 12,000 on January 4th. During a brief standoff before the battle, the demands of each side were conveyed, with the penitents demanding Ibn Ziyad be turned over to them for his role in Hussein's death, and the Umayyads demanding Suleiman swear fealty to Marwan. But these demands were little more than formality, the two armies coming together in battle after their refusal. The penitents put their mobility to good use, following advice from Zufar, reinforcing or withdrawing contingents as they came under attack, rather than confront the large...
Yeah, I was wondering, like, because usually it's usually during the medieval times, like, medieval, like, you know, Middle Eastern or Asians using horse archers, like, as I said, the perfect hit and run troops of the time. It's just refreshing to see that, like, shown in this video. I don't know why I decided to say orchestrated, but you know what I mean.
Umayyad force head on. Both commanders led their respective centres, with elements of Suleiman's horsemen dismounting to support their comrades from the ground where the fighting was thickest. This skirmishing was won by the penitents in the short term, though not without losses, and Ibn Numayr's forces withdrew in good order to regroup with those of Ibn al-Khalah. Now reunited, with Ibn Ziyad chastising al-Khalah for his earlier defeat and stripping him of command to end the feud, the Umayyad army now stood poised to bring their full numbers to bear, leading to a day of bloody fighting on the 5th that took a heavy toll on the already outnumbered Shia. When fighting resumed on the 6th, the exhausted penitents soon found themselves pressed from all sides, unable to prevent the Umayyads from flanking and surrounding their separated cavalry contingents. The same tactics that had previously enabled them to avoid the full weight of Umayyad numbers, now allowing them to be defeated piecemeal. Suleiman ibn Sarad and several of his close companions were slain by punishing volleys of arrows, with a series of spirited charges by Suleiman's second-in-command, Al-Musayyab ibn Najaba, and the late arrival of reinforcements from Basra, doing nothing to turn the tide. The destruction of the penitent cause brought the Umayyads one step closer to recovering their caliphate, though Marwan would not long outlive it, dying in the spring of 685, either by plague or assassination carried out by his queen, depending on which accounts you believe. He was succeeded by his son Abd al-Malik. Ain al-Wada did not mark the end of Shia participation in the second fitna, however. With their leaders dead, survivors from Suleiman's movement turned to Muqta al-Thaqafi, who had been growing in power in Iraq by appealing to traditionally disadvantaged non-Arab converts. Though he continued to characterize himself as a mere follower of Ibn al-Hanafiyyah, their actual ties remained tenuous, with Muqta even using a falsified letter of support from his figurehead to sway local leader Ibrahim ibn al-Ashtar to back his coup, according to some accounts. And
again, propaganda. If they don't know your true intentions, it can work. It's deceptive but effective if you get it right.
acting to isolate Ibn al-Hanafiyyah from the movement championing him. But whatever Mukhtar's motivations, October saw him break any remaining ties with Ibn al-Zubayr and oust his governor, Abdallah ibn Muti, taking control of most of Iraq and Armenia. Further Kharijite uprisings toppled Zubayrid authority in southern Persia and Bahrain, leaving both sides of the Persian Gulf in Kharijite hands, and Ibn al-Zubayr's would-be caliphate smaller than ever. But as weakened as he may have been, he was still far from helpless, defeating both an Umayyad push on Medina under the Qudaa tribal leader, Hubaysh ibn Dulja, and a Kharijite attack on Basra to secure his remaining holdings, leaving the final victor of the civil war still in doubt. The next few years would see some of the Umayyads' momentum reversed. The invasion force that had routed Suleiman's penitents made slow progress after this victory, delayed by Marwan's death and uprisings from the Qaysi tribes that had supported Dahak at Marj Rahit. When they finally launched their invasion of Iraq a year and a half later, in the summer of 686, al-Mukhtar was at something of a disadvantage, as his attempts to appease both the Arab tribal nobility and non-Arab converts, or Mawali, had fallen through and led to attempts by the tribal nobility to depose him over perceived erosion of their privileges. This conflict was further stoked by Ibn al-Zubayr's brother and governor of Basra, Musab, who courted the disgruntled Kufan nobility in an attempt to regain Iraq. The death of one of Mukhtar's commanders to plague shortly after his victory over an Umayyad probing force near Mosul sparked rumours that his army had been defeated, with an opportunistic revolt breaking out in late June. Nevertheless, the besieged Mukhtar was able to both put down this coup attempt, holding out in his palace long enough for Ibrahim ibn al-Ashtar's army to return from the Umayyad front and relieve him, and mobilize a large army of predominantly Persian-speaking Mawali and Shia partisans to confront the Umayyads, meeting them at the beginning of August, some 15 miles east of Mosul on the banks of the Qazir River. While Ziyad's army had been estimated to number as high as 80,000, this figure is far out of proportion with the same army's numbers during the Battle of Ain al-Wada or similar armies raised out of Syria, and is likely reflective of historian Abu Miknaf's anti-Umayyad leanings.
Abu Miknaf's narration in Al-Tabari was largely criticized by other Islamic scholars, such as Ibn Adi Abu Dawud, Daraqtuni, and many others, sorry if I butchered those names, which claimed that his narration was too weak, inconsistent, and strongly sided with the Shiites. Possible.
Though no fully reliable figure exists, the true number was likely little higher than 30,000,
That
even
sounds
allowing
more
for
realistic.
reinforcement from the remains of the failed push on Medina. Even so, the Umayyads held a definite numerical advantage over the 13,000 under Ibrahim ibn al-Ashtar, but were as weakened by division as before. The commander of their left wing, Umayr ibn al-Hubab, held a meeting with Ibrahim the night of August 5th to offer his defection in the coming battle. Following Umayyah's advice, Ibn al-Ashtar wasted no time in bringing the battle to the Umayyads the following morning, ignoring the normal protocol of raiding and skirmishing as his smaller army came crashing into their larger yet still disorganized foe. The initial stages of the battle went in the Umayyads' favour, with the Umayyad right wing under Ibn Numayr slaying the commander of Ibn al-Ashtar's right and putting them to flight. However, the fallen banner was quickly taken up by Abdullah ibn Waqa, nephew to one of the Prophet's companions, who rallied enough of the fleeing soldiers back to his side to stall the Umayyad advance. On the Umayyad left, accounts conflict on Umayyah's role, with the historian al-Kalbi claiming the promised defection never materialized, and Umayyah remained loyal to Ibn Ziyad, while others hold he deserted the battlefield. As he and Ibn al-Ashtar converse peacefully after the battle, the latter is likely closer to the truth. But either way, he took a rather passive role, his inaction leaving the Umayyad center open for the Kufan right and center to launch a desperate flanking attack. Crucial in this effort was Sharik ibn Jadir al-Taglibi, a warrior who had fought under Caliph Ali in the first fitna. whose furious cavalry charge carved open a path to Ubayd Allah ibn Ziyad and toppled the Umayyad banners. With the death of Ibn Ziyad and the continuing dissension and rivalry within the Umayyad ranks, the great army quickly dissolved. Umayyah's force.
Yep, that's what division in your force can do to you. If you can't fight like a united front.
Forces departing peacefully, while many others drowned trying to flee across the Qazir River. The short but brutal battle would delay any further Umayyad move against Iraq for several years, but do little to secure Mukhtar's unstable position, with the Zubayrids and his own tribal nobility still conspiring against him. Some months later, most likely in the late autumn of 686, Musab ibn al-Zubayr would march out of Basra for his own invasion, bolstered by exiled Kufan noble rebels. Given little time to recover, Ibn al-Ashtar's army made haste to meet them, though without the leader that had carried them to victory against the Umayyads. Ibn al-Ashtar himself, now the Zubayrid-friendly governor of Mosul, abandoned Mukhtar's cause under unclear circumstances in Qazir's aftermath, the coinciding defection of Umayyah suggesting a likely pact between the two. Amr ibn Shumayt took command. Though lacking his predecessor's experience, his army soon met with disaster just north of Basra at Madha, with resentment among the tribal nobility in both armies towards the Mawali, making up the bulk of Mukhtar's forces, coming to the fore in gruesome fashion. While non-Arabs were traditionally barred from serving as mounted warriors, Mukhtar had relaxed this rule and increased their pay to earn their support. Yet at the Battle of Madha, Ibn Shumayt once more required them to dismount and fight as foot soldiers. When Ibn Shumayt was slain and his army routed, the Kufan horsemen escaped, while huge numbers of the Mawali infantry were run down and slaughtered by the vengeful exiles, suffering a massively disproportionate death toll, with few escaping and no prisoners taken. This disaster shook faith in Mukhtar's messianic movement, and total collapse was not long in coming. The Zubayrid invasion force made haste by boat and horse towards Kufa, hastily assembling another army and attempting in vain to delay the invaders by flooding the canals along the Euphrates. Mukhtar would personally lead his army in the second desperate clash against the Zubayrids at Harura on Kufa's outskirts. Mukhtar and his forces fought bravely, with the battle initially in the balance. Muhammad ibn al-Ash'ath, leader of the Kufan exiles fighting under Musab, was slain, and the Highland Hijazi tribesmen, making up a fifth of the Basran force, fled early in the battle. However, these initial successes would be brought to naught when the Basran left wing, which, under the cautious Al-Malab Abi Sufra, had initially held back from the fighting, swung forward, crushing and routing Kufan forces already bloodied and exhausted from almost a day's fighting. Though Mukhtar narrowly escaped, his army and hopes were destroyed, and his supporters executed en masse by the victors, with the 4-month palace siege in Kufa only dragging out the inevitable. On April 3rd, 687, Musab's forces stormed his palace and executed him, swiftly restoring Armenia and Iraq to the Zubayrid fold. Other than Kharijite raiding and small border confrontations, the resulting Umayyad-Zubayrid stalemate would persist for the next 4 years, with both sides exhausted by the long civil war, and no major battles between the two occurred until 691. During this time, the long-neglected frontiers saw action once more, with an Umayyad army under Zubayr ibn Qais dispatched to the mountains of Algeria, where the Byzantine-allied Berber king, Caecilius, had taken advantage of the civil war to overrun much of Ifriqiya. Defeating and killing him in 688, Zuhair retook Kairouan and re-established the Caliphate as the dominant force in the region, with only the Byzantine stronghold of Carthage remaining a threat. And Abd al-Malik remained active against his Zubayrid rivals during the apparent lull as well, engaging in intrigue and diplomacy with Zubayrid supporters across the Caliphate, taking advantage of Ibn al-Zubayr's weakness and the growing apathy towards his predecessor's misdeeds after nearly a decade of war to chip away at his foe's support base. though his next attempt to invade Iraq in 689 was interrupted by his kinsman Amr ibn Said's short-lived coup attempt. The end of the civil war would almost come as an anticlimax after the fierce battles of its first years, with the majority of Musab's army defecting and abandoning him to die when Abd al-Malik finally recaptured Iraq in October 691. Abd al-Malik had Musab and his son Isa buried with honor, lamenting the tragedy of the civil war, but despite his poetic words, he remained ruthless in rooting out any remaining opposition, besieging Mecca, and mopping up Abdullah ibn Zubayr's last supporters the following year. Though putting down the Kharijite rebels and independents such as Ibn Qasim would take several more years, the Umayyad Caliphate had emerged victorious against its first would-be usurper. The second fitna had been a long and bloody affair, marked with a further departure from the unity of the Rashidun era. Even during the first fitna, the prospect of Muslims fighting Muslims remained a painful aberration, with concerted efforts at mediation preceding battles, and the conflict being brought into religious arbitration. But during the second fitna, the sectarians...
It's like when you see Christians against Christians. I don't know about any other religions at this time, but the only other one you can compare it to is when Christians are fighting other Christian nations. For example, England and France, or England versus Spain. It's all just a big messy affair, really. Or, because usually it'll be, especially in Europe, it'll be Christians against pagans, because Christians thinks pagans are scum and shouldn't be allowed to exist, which I think is a horrible mindset. Or they kill pagans because they would not convert. Again, I'm just not going to I'm just not going to get political about it. Let's just get back into it.
Schisms arising out of the first, and the blood feuds that accompanied them, made violence and retribution all too easy to accept. But shaken though it might have been, the Caliphate remained whole, with further victories still lying ahead in Africa, Asia, and even the unsuspecting Visigothic kingdom of Iberia. Our series on early Islamic history will continue, so make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button to see it. Please consider liking, commenting and sharing, it helps immensely. Our videos would...
And that'll do it. This has been another good episode of this Muslim expansion documentary series by Kings and Generals. So hopefully if you like this reaction, please like, comment and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.